Hello everybody, it's me, Fee, White Zulu, and welcome back to another piece from my book, my autobiography of the same name. And here I want to tell you about my first bit of formal schooling. It's chapter 23, the Nottingham Road Government School. Like Nicolette and Dine, Delia and I were destined to go to St. Anne's, and our older sisters had already been there several years. But there had been a change to the school's entrance exam. After the country had been slowly subjected to legislated apartheid, after the South African general election in 1948, in 1960, the Nationalist Party held a referendum among South African white voters over whether to leave the British Commonwealth and become a republic. The Afrikaner-dominated NATS, Nationalist Party, won easily, and we became the Republic of South Africa. Afrikaans immediately became the first official language, followed by English, for some reason French. Because St. Anne's, our prospective school, received a large grant from the Department of Education, Afrikaans as a subject became compulsory, and it had to be included in the 6 major subjects we would take to pass matric, a grade somewhere between O and A level, for those who don't know. It occurred to my father that, as we would be going to St. Anne's fairly soon and could not speak a word of Afrikaans, he should enroll Delia and me in a term's crash course at the Nottingham Road Government School, so we could learn enough of the language to pass the exam. The first I knew of this decision was early one spring morning, when Evelina bustled into my bedroom and whisked me out of bed. I was hurriedly dressed in a green and white gingham dress, white socks and black shoes, given a small brown suitcase, and bundled into the bakkie along with a sleepy Delia. A dusty half-hour later, we arrived at the government school, 2 prefab classrooms built on stilts, a tiny brick assembly hall, and a corrugated iron shed which housed the 2 lavatories, one for boys and one for girls, set around a dry brown playing field alongside the main Johannesburg to Durban railway line. We were greeted by the headmaster, Mr. Lamb, a most inappropriate name for this red-faced Irishman with his fiery temper and ferocious manner. Mr. Lamb taught standards 3 to 5, 9 to 11 years old, in one classroom, and his wife, a far gentler soul, taught the younger pupils from 5 years old in class 1 to 8 years old in standard 2. Delia and I attracted a ripple of interest from the small group of white children of various ages, which were milling around the school gate, kicking a half-inflated soccer ball about in the dust. Some of the older children were barefoot, I noticed enviously, as I scuffed my hard, new and uncomfortable black leather shoes despondently in the red earth. The interest was mainly in our bakkie, which was quite a new top-of-the-range model, and not in 2 neatly dressed girls with our short, dark hair and solemn expressions. I was the correct age to be in standard 5, I was led into my classroom by Mr. Lamb, where the older children were already standing to attention, and given a desk to share with a girl with long blonde plaits, whose father, I discovered later, was the station master. Delia was to be in Mrs. Lamb's class next door. My first experience of proper schooling started when I jumped with fright as Mr. Lamb gave a terrifying roar at a boy called Hamish, who was looking out of the window at the soccer ball lying in the playground. "Pay attention, boy," he thundered, and bug-eyed with terror, I sat down meekly with my classmates to pay close attention to my first lesson and try not to draw any adverse attention from our formidable headmaster. I was so afraid of them that I didn't dare do anything but hang on to his every word. And since he was an inspiring and interesting teacher, I was engrossed in every aspect of each subject he taught and enjoyed the stimulation as the days flew by of learning so many new things. I found Afrikaans quite easily as I was already bilingual, and at that age absorbing another language wasn't a big step. In the playground, I made new friends and learned to play more conventional games such as hopscotch and skipping, jumping the long rope alongside my peers while everybody took turns at swinging the rope, all chanting the traditional skipping songs and counting us in. There was a family of 5 Afrikaner children who stood out from the others. Their surname was Van der Berg, and their father was a wheel tapper on the railways. This was a term for semi-literates in South Africa, mostly Afrikaans speaking, with no skills or qualifications, but were employed by the nationalist government railways to do menial work, such as oversee the gangs of Africans who did all the hard physical labour on the tracks. When a train pulled into the station, a white man was employed to walk its length, hitting each wheel with a little hammer and listening for cracks or other weaknesses in the metal. Hence the name wheel tapper. Annebergs lived in a tin-roofed railway house with a veranda all the way around it, on the banks of the main line, and every day walked the 3 miles to school. The oldest was Benny, who was 15 and still in Standard 1. His voice had broken. He was well into puberty and very close to 6 feet tall. But there he was, crouched at a desk, his grubby knees practically touching his ears, sharing his lessons with 8-year-olds. His younger brother, Dirkie, 14, was in class 2 among the 6-year-old children. And I can't remember the names of the other boys, but Corrie, the only girl and obviously the brightest member of the family, was in our class and was actually the correct age. Van der Berg boys all had their bullet heads permanently shaved, something I'd never come across before. Why are all the Van der Berg's boys' heads shaved? I asked Jean during our first break together. Since she shared a desk with me, she'd become my new best friend, and I discovered was a valuable source of gossip. Because they all have ringworm, she replied. What's ringworm? I asked, imagining little circles of live, wriggling worm-like maggots in their hair. rather like the colour illustrations of blowfly infections in sheep's nether regions under their tails, pictures of which I'd carefully examined in my father's Sheep Management and Diseases book. It sounded disgusting. I don't know. It's something dirty and very catching, she said. So keep well away from them. We all do. And she shuddered theatrically. I looked cautiously at the Vanderbergs as they scuffed in the dust on the bare part of the playground under some gum trees. Nobody else was playing with them. The other children kept their distance and played their own games. The girls skipping with a long rope, and the boys were having a makeshift game of soccer on the patchy brown grass playing field. The four outcast boys were thin to the point of emaciation, and their skin had an exhausted grey patina under the well-established dirt. Patches of dry skin flaked off in between the numerous scabs, leaving white areas, and giving the impression of plane tree bark with its various shades of grey and white. Their shorts were far too small, as they'd obviously outgrown their school uniforms a while back, and their short-sleeved shirts were tight across their toast-rack ribs. They reminded me of the starving jackal hounds I saw now and again on the farm, when the jackal pack was summoned by my father to reduce the vermin population a bit. I'd never seen undernourished people before, certainly not among the Africans on our farm, rather the reverse. The Vanderberg's feet, bare feet, were horny and so thickened and tough that they looked like well-worn leather. All the Zulus on our farm had tough feet, and even mine and my sisters were nicely hardened on the sole, enabling us to run over gravel and thorns alike. Jean saw me looking at Benny's feet. He trod on a puff adder last term, but it wasn't able to bite him. His feet are too tough, she said. I stared at his leathery feet, and they did look as impenetrable as any feltskins. I could just picture a puff adder's fangs bouncing off, unable to puncture the horny layers of Benny's feet. Corrie, on the other hand, always arrived at school in the mornings dressed in a frilly party dress, which I secretly coveted, rather than our regulation green-checked uniform. Her hair was elaborately styled in long ringlets, which we immediately dubbed ringworms, and tied with brightly coloured satin ribbons. Corrie always wore pretty sandals and was scrubbed until her skin glowed. I was intrigued by the bizarre discrepancy between Corrie's appearance and that of her four brothers, and asked Jean why she was dressed so differently. She shrugged. I've heard that their father hangs all the boys up, one by one, tied up in a sack from a tree branch, and beats them with a stick, for no reason at all, she said, matter-of-factly, as though it was some normal behaviour. I was slightly horrified, but wondered if that was how Afrikaners brought up their children. I knew nothing about them, other than the disparaging way in which my mother and father referred to them as boots, almost alluding to them as a subspecies of the human race. I was quickly swept up into playground politics and gave the rougher, dirtier children a wide berth. They were mostly Afrikaners, although the Nottingham Road Government School was an English medium school. The Department of Education had a three-tier system. In towns and villages where the majority of whites spoke Afrikaans, they built Afrikaans medium, junior and high schools in which all lessons were taught in Afrikaans. Conversely, if the majority of town dwellers spoke English, as in the case of Nottingham Road, with its large scattered community of English-speaking white farmers, it had an English medium junior school, but no high school, as there weren't enough children to warrant building one. My fellow pupils were all destined to attend Escort High School, an English medium boarding establishment in a small town beyond Moy River. There were no African children in our school, nor were there in any other white government schools. Indian children attended schools set aside for them by the Department of Indian Affairs, and coloured pupils also went to separate schools, somewhere in the coloured townships near Durban. In 1953, the nationalist government had come under the leadership of D.F. Malan, a dyed-in-the-wool Afrikaner, and one of the most enthusiastic architects of apartheid. He was an active member of the Broederbond, the Brotherhood, a secret society with covert cells within all the crucial institutions and organizations of the entire country. Their aim was to create the Afrikaner nation, die Volk, as a separate and superior group in terms of language, culture, and religion. The society publicly waged an energetic campaign to propagate Afrikaner cultural tradition and historical legacy for all South Africans, white South Africans. In 1953, D.F. Malan instituted the Bantu Education Act, putting educations for Africans under a government department called Bantu Affairs instead of the Department of Education. This establishment built and controlled schools for African children, and all lessons were taught in English. Schools were available, but not compulsory for African children. I think I'll leave it there and do the rest of it next week. It should be long enough. I haven't actually counted, but it should be all right. I want to thank John Muslane very much for helping me create these videos. And if you want any more information, I've got a website, www.whitezulubook.com. I want to thank you all for listening to my videos, and I hope I've brought some maybe fond or not so fond memories back of junior school life, something I didn't have except for one term, but I remember it all so vividly, and I'll give you more in the next video. So goodbye and thank you.